Traveling on the eve of the wedding, Mark fell in love with the local BB owner at first sight. He stubbornly believed that it was the reincarnation of his first love who died young. It was a gift from God to him. I broke up with him in anger. I never thought that I would encounter a mudslide on the way down the mountain. And Mark broke his leg while saving me. That's all. The rift between us disappeared. Entered the marriage hall. Until I was diagnosed with cancer in my old age. When I found that my huge family couldn't even afford the medical expenses. Just know. Over the years, Mark has been secretly supporting the lady boss of the BB. Even my children. Everyone agrees with his approach. So I was pissed off to death. Open your eyes again. Facing Mark's confession. I slammed the table and shouted at him, I approve of your courageous pursuit of love. The crowd, who were still drinking and chatting happily, heard my loud approval. They all stopped what they were doing. When I see the eyes of people watching the fun. Mark, who was always cold, turned pale. Pulling my wrist and warning me with your eyes to stop making trouble. If it were the previous life. I was always afraid that he would get angry, so I quit while I was ahead. But now. I just want to expose his hypocritical true face under the mask. Think of this. I turned my head and met Mark's dissatisfied eyes. Hold his wrist with your palm turned upside down. Walk towards the protagonist surrounded in the center. She is the proprietress of this BB. Mark fell in love at first sight. Jane. Nancy. Maybe he anticipated my next move. He frowned and growled at me. But I still didn't stop. Mark, feeling embarrassed, angrily shook off my hand. This trip was meant to test our relationship. Now I just feel moved. I didn't betray you. Why are you so aggressive? The words fell. Everyone sighed. At this time. Wearing a moon-white cheongsam. Kathy, waving a folding fan in her hand, slowly stepped forward from the crowd. The footsteps stopped 1 meter away from me. She first observed Mark. After seeing the expensive watch strap he accidentally exposed. Turn your gaze to me again. Looking up and down. A long time. She burst out laughing. It seems like you guys are on a breakup trip. Ms. Nancy. You won't even book a room with your boyfriend when you travel. Now you're even taking care of your boyfriend's heart. Is it too strong? She waved her folding fan. Without making a sound, he pulled Mark to her side. Seeing that Mark had no intention of arguing. I pulled the corner of my mouth. Find the wedding photos stored in your phone. Smiling, he pushed Mark, whose face was livid, towards Kathy. You are right. I also think I'm too strong. Then he looked at Mark. Raise your voice and you must seize this fate. What if this is really Lily's reincarnation? Don't miss it again. I'm waiting for you to send me an invitation. Rest assured. I will never bother you. I will explain the engagement to my parents. Finished. I pretended to be sad and wiped away the non-existent tears from the corners of my eyes. Turn around and leave without hesitation. Looking at Mark at this moment. Looking at Kathy who was confused. Lily. With Mark's hoarse voice. The whole place was boiling. Even Jane blushed. I lowered my head in embarrassment. But the body got closer. Some people say that Jane was used as a stand-in. Some people also say that Mark was calling Jane. So I am kind-hearted. Return again. In Jane's puzzled and proud eyes. Good intentions speak up. My ex-fiancé had a first love. By the way, both of your names have a homophone. Snap. When turning around. From the corner of my eye, I happened to see Jane slapping Mark. Really? Very gratifying. Previous life. After Mark confessed his infidelity to me. Jane was also there. But I didn't have an attack like today. Instead, I was immersed in the pain of being betrayed. That's my departure. Gave him the opportunity to get in touch with Jane. From that day on. Mark insisted that Jane was Lily's reincarnation. He got angry at my dissuasion. He always looks at me coldly. Finally, Nancy said calmly. You really can't compare to Lily's cuteness and understanding. Over the years. I have already repaid the kindness that the Nancy family has shown me. I will marry you as you wish. But now. My Lily is right in front of me. Why can't you let me go? Seeking my happiness. That's all. A pre-wedding trip that started out sweetly turned into a contradictory separation. I've never seen him so cold. I broke up with you in anger. I choose to end this journey alone. But I didn't expect. You will encounter a mudslide. I didn't expect. Mark will come to rescue me. So the legs are tilted. I thought there was still love between us. Until old age. This is our 30th year of marriage. I was diagnosed with cancer. Mark said he couldn't come up with the money. My children even used the excuse of company cash flow as an excuse to not treat me. I was so frustrated that I accidentally discovered that all my assets over the years had been transferred to the same account. And that account. This is the Kathy whom Mark fell in love with at first sight many years ago. I just found out. How stupid I have been these years. All the children know Kathy's existence. Even every holiday I would choose a day to go there. The moment before being pissed off. Mark, who already had gray hair, pulled out my oxygen tube himself. Smile viciously if your parents hadn't threatened me with my loss-making project. How could I let go of Jane? This is all your retribution. My children. Standing aside and watching indifferently. Silence left. Now think about it. Maybe I have already lost myself in my previous life. Only then will you end up being pissed off to death. Ding dong. The vibration of my phone in my pocket brought me back to my senses. I looked at the mudslide on the push notification. Eyes slightly dark. After that unhappy day, Mark seemed to have disappeared. There was no trace of him in the entire scenic area. Instead, the tourists in the BB all knew about the farce that day. When you look at me. Always with a little sympathy. But I feel lucky. Everything stopped at the critical point in time. No more life where you can only ask Mark for money after marriage. No more painstaking care of children watching coldly. For me. This is all good. Looking out the window at the blue sky. I was humming a little tune and about to go out. When opening the door. Just happened to meet Mark and the other two who came out of the opposite room. Why wear such a short skirt? Changed. The man frowned subconsciously and ordered. Kathy, who was still smiling, immediately frowned. Maybe it's because he realized the change of his identity. Mark lit a cigarette awkwardly. Reaching out and pulling Kathy's coat up. Suddenly explained that Miss Kathy and I were still in the getting to know you stage. Nothing. Hearing. Jane looked at Mark with some resentment. But after meeting his eyes, a smile soon appeared on his face. I don't want to care about this interest that belongs only to them. When turning around. But Mark pulled me hard. He blew smoke rings in my face. Soften your voice, Nancy. Stop it. I just want to find the feeling I once had. Wait till the trip is over. We'll go back and get married. Listen to his ridiculous words. I shook his hand off. Pointing at the teeth marks on his collarbone that had not yet disappeared, Mark sneered. You dare to confess to me that you have changed your mind. Why don't you dare admit what you and Jane did in bed? You really disgust me. Mark paused while smoking. I opened my mouth and wanted to tell me something. But was interrupted by the noise in the distance. Jane was wearing sexy clothes. Drinking with the tourists. Enjoyable chat. Next second. Mark's eyes showed possessiveness. He brushed past my shoulder and ran straight towards Jane. This is the first time he left me. Since he was 18, he found Nancy's family. After successfully moving into Nancy's family. He never left me. At that time. When I was just beginning to fall in love, I always liked to use my big sister's temper to embarrass him. But he is always like a piece of wood. Not angry. He said, Nancy. You just don't get along with people. I thought. He is the one who understands me. So. I dove in. Even though I lived again. Even though I had slept in the same bed with him for more than 30 years in my previous life. I still feel a little lost at this moment. But this loss. It was quickly diluted. 3 a.m. I was still drinking in the tavern. I heard the ambulance. I found out after asking around. Kathy and a man are lying inside. I don't know what the conflict was between these two people. Ran to the snowy mountains. They both fell down when they came down. This is not. Fell into hospital. Wrestling. Some important information flashed through my mind. I couldn't help but go to the hospital. It's better not to go. This time. It actually let me know the most confusing question in my previous life. As the sky brightens. Many of the people who came to watch the excitement dispersed. I found Mark's doctor as his fiancé. I saw my restless look. He shook his head regretfully. Your fiancé's leg was hit too hard by a heavy object. Even if I wake up. I'm afraid I'll get sick. My brain feels like it was hit hard by a hammer. There's only a constant buzzing sound in my ears. A long time. After sorting out your emotions. I tried to find out whether the root cause of the opening is similar to the slope leg. The doctor nodded. That moment. The last wall in my heart completely collapsed. I look at the calendar. Found out 2 days later. That was the day in my previous life when Mark and I quarreled and left. So when he came to rescue me, his leg is already injured. But why would he do this? Now. I really want to rush into the ward, grab his collar and question him. But what's the use of this? This world hasn't happened yet. Even if I said. He just thinks I'm crazy. I don't know how I walked out of the hospital when the debris flow collapsed in the previous life. The various things that Mark did to protect me kept playing in my mind like a passing scene. I asked him, "Do you regret saving me?" But he held my hand. "My eyes are full of tenderness and the decision about you. I never regret it." I raised my head and pushed back the tears. Take off the ring that already has traces. Thrown into the sewer. Amid the sound of the ring hitting the ground, I slowly loosened the nails that were deeply embedded in my palms. After leaving the hospital, I still pretend I know nothing. Seriously playing the role of a woman who is hurt in love. Not hanging out in the pub all day. Just lying in the house and sleeping. During this period, I also bombarded Mark with text messages. Create the illusion that I left heartbroken. "Mark. Can you please don't abandon me? I can't live without you. Mark. If you don't come to comfort me." I went home by myself. Watching the same text messages from the previous life being sent out one by one. I started packing my luggage with a blank expression. Replicating the same scene from the previous life. As expected. Mark is getting anxious. I turned on the surveillance camera installed before leaving. I saw Mark pushing his wheelchair upstairs. Anxious to ask Jane to open my room. But after seeing my tidy room, there was no trace of anxiety on his face. On the contrary, I feel somewhat fortunate. Did I guess wrong? As I was thinking, Mark received a call. His face immediately became serious. Pushing the wheelchair out. Seeing. I suddenly remembered the resentment Mark had towards me in my previous life. I called my assistant immediately. After investigation, it was found. His project did suffer losses. As for that phone call, it should be that his parents knew about his change of heart. Afraid that I would be sad, so he threatened him. Ding dong. Mark is trying the password to open my location. My heart trembled. Looking at the position where I was 800 meters away from the mudslide, I feel much more at ease. Not long. Mark came over. Just when he got off the car, the mudslide collapsed. "Nancy. Where are you? Don't scare me. Nancy." Mark was stunned for a second. He started shouting my name. As the rescue team arrived, more and more people. The baseball cap I put in place in advance was spotted by the sharp-eyed Mark. He ignored the advice of those around him. Rushed in, "That's my fiancé's hat. I'm going to save her." In the chaos, no one noticed his sloped legs. I saw him holding my hat and moving stones. I even took the time to answer a phone call. I was so sad that I cried and called my uncle and aunt. Nancy encountered a mudslide. "You tell me things. I'm afraid it won't be finished." I clearly saw the corners of his mouth curled up after he succeeded. Then, I stood in the crowd and called out to Mark. "I'm here." Hearing. Mark turned his head and looked at me almost mechanically. His lips trembled and he opened his mouth in disbelief. Snap. I haven't finished talking yet. In his horrified eyes, the rubble stuck on the hillside rolled towards him. Mark's legs are completely broken. When I heard the news, I've already boarded the plane back to Ningxing. Along the way, I imagined a lot. But I didn't expect that Mark came to save me because he wanted to use Nancy's family to revive the project. In the previous life, he saved my leg. It's just a two birds with one stone strategy. Can save my heart. And can leave an indelible presence in Jane's heart. He still has a good plan. When the plane lands. When I turned on my phone, all I saw were Mark's missed calls. Just when I was stunned, he called again. On the phone. He spoke hurriedly and with a little caution. "Are you going back? The doctor said my leg is broken. Can the wedding be postponed?" See me silent. He immediately proved that Jane and I had already made it clear. We really have nothing. Nancy. Now I only have you. What wedding? From the moment you choose to change your heart, it's gone. Mark. If you don't want to lose everything you have in the Mark family, don't disgust me anymore. Hang up the phone. Block all his contact information. I ran towards my parents who came to pick me up. Looking at my parents' gray hair. My eyes can't help but feel sore. Previous life. Although Mark's legs are. I still want to hold the wedding despite my parents' advice. Even to make up for him. Arranged him into the core project of Nancy family. One wrong step. Wrong steps. Soon Mark became entangled in Nancy's family. Using Mark's family background to wipe out Nancy's family. My parents and I can only rely on him to survive. My parents, who have been proud all their lives, are extremely disappointed in me. Back home. Lost contact with me. Even their departure. No one notified me. My relatives in my hometown said, Nancy, your parents hated themselves for not protecting you until they died. Daughter. Get in the car. My parents' voices pulled me out of my memories. I rubbed my sore eyes. He hummed hard. This time. It's my turn to protect them. On the way home. I explained the dispute with Mark to my parents. And said. Whatever Mark does next. We as a family must be of one mind. Cannot be influenced. The phone call from my dad threatening me. This must be the reason why Mark hated Nancy's family. That day later. I took over all the big and small matters of the company. Start investigating those suspected of betraying Nancy's family. After only half a month of hard work. Still no progress. Instead, Mark came to the door after being driven back. He was carrying bags of things. Sitting in a wheelchair at the door. When you see me. My eyes immediately lit up. Pushing a wheelchair towards me. There's just too much stuff. Accidentally rolled off the wheelchair. With the exclamation. I asked the butler to help him up. When looking at each other. He pursed his lips with tears. If it were before. I've already softened my heart. But I'm not the same Nancy anymore. Nancy. I know I made you sad. These are your favorite. I don't ask you to forgive me. But please don't ignore me, okay? These years. If it weren't for your help. I wouldn't be able to return to the Mark family so easily. You helped me get everything I have. Nancy. I am grateful to you. Mark's eyes were red as he tried to hold my hand. I dodged it sideways. Get up indifferently. Looking down at him playing the emotional card. Mark. Don't you just want me to help you with the losses on your project? I tell you. No way. The words fell. Mark paused as he wiped his tears. Unbelievable look up. He buried his head. Laughing out loud. Like he's mocking something. For a while. Then Nancy spoke. Our love for so many years. Are you really unwilling to help me one last time? I shook my head. See how determined I am. He struggled to get up with the wheelchair. The 1.8-meter air pressure almost made me breathless. Nancy. It was your parents who forced me to coax you. Otherwise my legs wouldn't be broken. It's okay, if you don't want to. This is what you, Nancy family, owe me. I never thought that someone would be so shameless as to do this. I took out the recording of my conversation with the doctor and put it in front of him. After hearing the clear voice inside. Mark's face turned pale. If you still want to continue to quibble. I raised my hand and slapped him hard. Do you still have any shame? Your legs were broken just to please Jane. What does it have to do with our Nancy family? If you're being unreasonable. Then don't blame me for releasing this recording. Now. Please get out of my house. Finished. I held out my hand and asked the butler to ask him to leave. Just before leaving. Mark suddenly turned around and looked at me. The face is full of gloom. Like being stuck in some memory. Nancy whispered. You are as cruel as Lily. I was stunned. He rarely mentions Lily in front of me. Close to me from Mark. After successfully reaching a cooperation with Nancy's family. I just found out that he had a first love who died young and was hidden in his heart. That was his secret at the age of 18. But I already like him. From childhood to adulthood. The things I like are always within reach. Mark is no exception. I thought he was good to me. Really like me. But later. I know he is good to me. Marry me. These are all bargaining chips that have been negotiated with Nancy's family. Although Mark never mentioned. I couldn't help but investigate Lily. Coincidentally. Lily and I are from the same school. He was the person I hated the most. Because she always steals my thunder. In that aristocratic school where money can make the devil work. Lily's poor students are particularly special. Also exceptionally radiant. I hate that she took away my glory. But I can't help but envy her generosity and freshness. Recalling Mark's eyes just now. That's clearly not the look of a lover. It's like I'm reborn. With endless hatred. Ken isn't Mark's favorite Lily? How can I hate her? I quickly put this suspicion behind me. Because something happened to Nancy's family. The cause is some employees stood on the rooftop to accuse Nancy's family of being a black-hearted factory. The media arrived on time. Fanning the flames. The company's stock plummeted. My parents are so anxious about this. I fainted directly. No need to guess. This is Mark's revenge. Nancy. It was your parents who harmed you. If I had known. You shouldn't threaten him with the project. My father spoke in a hoarse voice. My mother held my hand and her eyes were red. Seeing my parents become much older overnight. I raised my head and pushed back the tears. I patted my parents' hands to comfort them. Dad, this is none of your business. Everything is under my control. Leave the rest to me. Isn't he going to take revenge on Nancy's family? Then we will do as he wishes. Then. I let Nancy's family fall. Facing media criticism. I don't cry in front of the camera. Just hide away and not see anyone. Not long. Mark found me. It's just that there is a well-dressed woman beside him. Jane. See my swollen eyes. Mark's eyes flashed with something strange. But there is still a mocking smile on the corner of his mouth. He reached out to pull me. After I avoided. He's not angry either. Instead, I naturally lit a cigarette. Blowing smoke rings in my face. Nancy. I just want you to help me. You and Nancy's family forced me to do this. But it doesn't matter. As long as you admit your mistakes. For the sake of past affection. I'm still willing to help Nancy's family. After all, these years. Without the help of Nancy's family. I wouldn't be able to return to the Mark family so easily. Look. He knows everything. It was me who let the wolf in. I think he is extremely talented. It is a good sword in business. But now. He used all the tricks he learned from Nancy's family on us. Really shameless. I'm not. After spitting at him fiercely. I got up and left. Just passing by Jane. She blocked my way. Ms. Nancy. This is the invitation from Mark and me. Remember to come to the wedding. I'm stunned. The already red and swollen eyes looked particularly pitiful at this moment. Mark saw me like this. Laughed out loud with satisfaction. Claims that if I'm willing to ask him. Maybe you can consider keeping me outside. I ignored him. Instead, he quietly watched the plea for help in Jane's eyes. That moment. There seems to be some kind of resonance. I took the invitation from her. My departure. In Mark's eyes, it was a runaway. Little did they know. The downfall of Nancy's family that he saw was all an illusion. Everything is my plan. Yes. Jane has been in Ningxing since. I knew her whereabouts. Not long. She found me on her own initiative. Ms. Nancy. I want to make a deal with you. I just found out. It turns out that after Mark brought Jane back. Jane was dressed according to Lily's preferences. Even eating. Sleeping must be strictly followed according to Lily's appearance in Mark's memory. He's a lunatic and I'm only after him for the money. I hope that the homestay my parents left for me will not be taken away. But I don't want to sacrifice my whole life. Ms. Nancy. I know it's presumptuous to say this. But I can tell you Mark's plan. But after it's done. I need some money. From now on. I will never set foot in Ningxing. After careful consideration. I finally agreed to her request. And through her disclosure. Created a false impression. If it weren't for Jane's surrender. Maybe Mark's plan. Our Nancy family will really be seriously hurt. I should have known. He is no longer the Mark who knelt in the rain 5 years ago and tried desperately to prove himself. To better confuse Mark. I moved out of the villa with my parents. Spread the word that I'm selling my house. In fact. My parents and I moved into a sea view house in the suburbs. Sunbathing. A month passed like this. Mark's influence in Ningxing is growing. Even the Mark family is a little bit afraid at this moment. The original heir of the Mark family is like an ant on a hot pot. Afraid that Mark, the illegitimate son who was adopted halfway, would take his place. Triggering Mark openly and covertly. But he resolved it. Soon it was the engagement day. When I arrived at the scene. Mark happened to be at the door. He laughed and mocked me. Nancy. This wedding of the century could have been yours. It's a pity. You are too stubborn. After all, she is not my match. Fortunately, my Jane is well behaved and sensible. For a time. I can't tell. Is it Lily or Jane he called? But it doesn't matter anymore. Because they're almost the same person. When the ceremony begins. I almost didn't recognize Jane, the bride on the stage. She looks so much like Lily. If you don't observe carefully, it's possible that they are the same person. I am very happy that you all can attend my son Mark's engagement party. Relying on today's day. I have another happy announcement. Mark's father took the microphone and spoke. No doubt. It must be about Mark's identity. But just as he was about to continue speaking, the phone is ringing. After the call is connected, Mark's father's face darkened as fast as possible. Walk towards me quickly, whispered Nancy. Are you mistaken? Our Mark family has always been law-abiding. Where does the unfair trade come from? This is a dramatic reversal. Mark couldn't help but call out father. What are you talking about? Nancy's family has long been a lost cause. My engagement is the most important thing right now. I saw him anxiously. Laughed out loud. Looking at Mark's father, Mark's family is not. But Mark has been contaminated by a lot of. Mark's father is also a member of Mark's family. You shut up, this is all nonsense. Father. How could I? Mark didn't finish his words. Mark's father slapped him to the ground. Next second. Mark's family left in a hurry. No matter how Mark argues. Mark's father wouldn't listen. Finally, he raised his foot and kicked Mark hard. The beasts born from a cheap person are not presentable. From now on. You have nothing to do with the Mark family. Get lost. Huge engagement party. The building is already empty now. The rest are just some media watching the fun. Asking Mark tricky questions. But they were all driven away by the crazy Mark. He stood up with the help of crutches. Turn your head and look at me. Frowning Nancy. You planned all this, right? You knew that the Mark family would recognize my identity today. So you let Nancy's family fall into decline these days. I once thought I had really brought down the Nancy family. Let your guard down. Then you bring me back to my original form on my most glorious day, right? I looked at this face that I had loved since I was 18. Suddenly I felt that he became a stranger. At first. After Lily's death. As an illegitimate child living abroad, he began to try his best to return to the Mark family. But no matter what. They were all driven out by the Mark family. Then he met me. After learning that I was from Nancy's family. He approached me. Through my matchmaking. He successfully boarded with Nancy's family. Nancy's family, Mark's family. The strength of the two companies is not much different. But I am the only daughter in Nancy's family. That's why my parents agreed to Mark's request. The purpose is to protect me in the future. But now he is repaying kindness with hatred. I took a deep breath and looked up to meet his angry gaze. Speak calmly, Mark. The Nancy family never owed you anything. You approach me for a reason. Nancy's family accepted you. Help you regain power and return to the Mark family. But you are because of my parents' so-called threats. I hated Nancy's family. Mark. You're just a beast. You confessed your infidelity to me. Why can't I tell my parents that I don't love you anymore? I'm not an unreasonable person, but what about you? But he wanted to kill Nancy's family. Since I returned to Ningxing. I set up this game. You are too arrogant. Lost. After hearing what I said. Mark was stunned. I kept muttering that I didn't lose. I didn't lose. Then he pulled my hand again. Nancy said sincerely. Please help me. As long as you come forward to clarify. There's still time for everything. I am still a member of the Mark family. As long as you want. We are still the same as before. I will treat you better. Nancy. You will help me, right? I struggled to break free from his hand. I don't want to get too involved with him. I just didn't expect. My action actually irritated him. When I turned around. He took advantage of the empty engagement scene. He picked up the red wine bottle scattered on the ground and smashed it on the back of my head. Before becoming unconscious. Mark's vicious voice rang in Nancy's ears. You forced me to do this. When I wake up again. The first thing that comes into view is the snow-white ceiling. The nose is filled with the smell of disinfectant. This is in the hospital. Suddenly, a thought came to my mind. But when I saw Mark follow the doctor in. But I felt something was wrong. Don't be afraid, Nancy. You are sick. This is the psychiatrist I hired. Rest assured. It's safe here. No one will find you. Mark's bewitching voice made me tremble all over. This is definitely not a regular hospital. See me struggling. The doctor immediately injected me with an unknown drug. I've lost all my strength. Like a pool of dead fish lying on the hospital bed. Mark. You are breaking the law. With my roar. Mark waved the doctor out. Looking down at me. Nancy's eyes were full of resentment. Your struggle here will be in vain. You destroyed everything I worked so hard for. I'm going to punish you. Do you remember the first time we met? To be honest. I really hated your temper at that time. I want to lock you up in here and torture you all the time. How can you have both status and family affection? And I have nothing. Even Lily, who I once regarded as my salvation, is leaving me. Am I not miserable enough? Why are you doing this to me? Nancy's family has done me a favor. But what's the difference between me and the dog you raise? In Nancy's family. I am not even as good as a housekeeper. Why do you ask me to be kind, Nancy? You ruined me. The rest of life. I will make you and your parents live in the pain of loss forever. His eyes were red. The hatred that filled me made me almost unable to breathe. The air fell into a dead silence. A long time. I laughed out loud. I looked up at him sarcastically. Is this also why you killed Lily? Bang. Maybe because I was too shocked. Mark wanted to sit down but accidentally fell to the ground. He stared at me. The surprise in his eyes quickly turned into viciousness. He grabbed my neck with his hands. Who told you this? Get a glimpse of his reaction. My eyebrows jumped. It seems. I guessed right. So even though I was almost out of breath. But I still keep smiling. Even laughing louder. Looking at the wall behind him that was faintly blown by the wind. It was covered with all the photos of Lily when she was alive. Following my gaze. Mark then slowly let go of his hand. I got a break. Looking at him with such affection, you said you loved Lily. Why is she imprisoned in this ward? Let me guess. Lily's body was already at the point of running out of oil. So she advises you to live well. But you had already set your sights on me at that time. Lily happened to know about this. So kind Lily advises you not to hurt me in exchange for the chance to return to the Mark family. Angry you. Killed her here with my own hands. Am I right? Mark. That day. Mark heard what I said. Almost fled. I looked at the group photos blown away by the breeze. Suddenly I feel that love is a terrible thing. Since I decided to attend the wedding. I investigated everything that happened to Lily during her lifetime. I just didn't expect. Mark used me as a springboard so early on. Those words. I just guessed it by observing the expression on Mark's face. Although I'm not a psychologist. But I know Lily well enough. The woman I once hated the most. These days of imprisonment. Because I am afraid of losing track of time. I count the minutes every day. Mark would come in drunk sometimes. Scold me. To make me suffer. He deliberately leaked the outside world's situation. Your parents have been looking for you like crazy. Because of you. The Mark family doesn't want me anymore. But that's okay. You'll be by my side for the rest of my life. We have a long way to go. When he said this. There is always a beast in the eyes that wants to tear it apart. But he made a wrong move. On the 5th day of my imprisonment here. Mark unexpectedly didn't give me the injection today. Instead, it brought me a lot of food that I used to like. I just found out. Because of my disappearance. My parents are devastated. And he had another chance to negotiate with the Mark family. Nancy. As long as you obey me from now on. We are still the same as before. Before. What is the same? Let me live my life looking at his face. Repeat the mistakes of the past life. Certainly. I didn't say anything. Instead, he quietly stuffed something into his mouth. After feeling the strength in my limbs gradually. While he's not paying attention. I grabbed a handful of chili powder from the burger and threw it in his eyes. With his cry of pain. I ran out successfully. I saw Jane waiting for me at the door. Want to go? Seeing Mark catching up. Jane immediately protected me behind her. He raised his foot and kicked Mark's crotch. Scum. Mark was completely dumbfounded. I didn't expect Jane to appear here. See her protecting me. Mark seemed to have figured something out. I laughed at myself. I lost again. Soon. Sirens sounded. This time Mark didn't resist. But looking at me empty. I don't know what I'm thinking. A long time later. I just found out. That's despair. He knew he had no chance of recovery. That's all. Mark was taken away like a lost dog. Jane and I smiled at each other. This brought this plan to a perfect end. The day Mark was sentenced. At his request. I still went to see him. Not seen for a few days. He has a lot more stubble. It's like the whole person has been sucked out of his spirit. Looking at me blankly. Nancy. Why did he speak hoarsely? I replayed many memories with him in my mind. Finally found. It's all unsightly calculation. When I see the eyes of people watching the fun. Mark, who was always cold, turned pale. Pulling my wrist and warning me with your eyes to stop making trouble. In fact, you were very successful in your previous life. Although I gave up Jane under the threat of my parents. But in the end, you are still the one in charge of the Mark family. Ningqing's most influential new noble. I thought you loved me too. Until we walked hand in hand for more than 30 years. I just realized that you never loved me. Even hate Nancy's family. To avenge me. You devoured Nancy's family. Let me be a bird in a cage. Even when I was terminally ill, I can only survive by your mood. Did you know? I was pissed off by you. Mark. You once regarded Lily as your salvation. But because she dissuaded you from harming others to gain the benefits you wanted. You stopped her treatment. I thought I could get into your heart. I will put my heart in front of you. You don't cherish. Talking. Tears drip from cheeks onto the back of hands. I continued. Have you asked Jane for her opinion? She just wanted to hook up with a rich guy. But you used sweet words to trick her into coming to Ningxing. Let her be someone else's shadow. Do you think she won't hate you? Mark. You always feel like everything is under your control. But you don't know. Feelings cannot stand calculation. Hearing. Mark was stunned. Then she covered her face and cried. Just before leaving. I didn't hear him say sorry. But it doesn't matter anymore. Nancy family needs me now. My parents need me too. And Jane. Before Mark is sentenced. I flew back to my homestay first. Claiming that people's lives are good. Let me take care of myself. I looked up at the sun as the clouds dispersed. A bright smile.